I could see everybody talking about macro, because it looks like the macro is the foundation. Indeed, one of the best answers I've gotten as a journalist asking, is macroeconomic stability food to eat? Why macro, macro, macro? And somebody said, well, if there's no macro stability, there may be no food to eat. So macro stability is the basis, which is why I think it's time to hear from them. And I need to mention that this group was blessed with at least 4 former governors. So Dr. Esiama, you are really blessed. A lot of ancient wisdom, chaired by Dr. Paul Akwa. I'd like to also mention that people like Dr. Nikwa Kusowa, Dr. Ashong, and a lot of strong economists attended upon that particular group. Let's put our hands together for them. As I welcome the presenter for the macro group, Mr. Leslie Dwight Mensah. Leslie, you are too far away. We can't clap all the way, so we have to run. So Mr. Leslie Dwight Mensah is the presenter for the macro, and the theme is restoring macroeconomic stability. That's the thematic area, and Leslie will lead the presentation. He has a personal assistant. Please put your hands together for them. Good luck, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Vice President, government ministers, government officials, members of the planning committee for this dialogue, special invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present the interim report of the Macroeconomic Stability Group, this dialogue. Let me begin by providing a context. The context is twofold. The long-term historical context, which is that despite the importance of macroeconomic stability for realizing Ghana's ambitions for rapid development, its attainment has historically largely been elusive. That's the long-term context. The short-term context is that we have been through an excruciating macroeconomic crisis, the effects of which we continue to feel today. Now that crisis has resulted from major macroeconomic issues that have festered for long. A central one is a pattern of unsustainable fiscal policies. We have had, in the 5 years prior to the crisis in 2022, an average budget deficit of 9% of GDP if you account for off-budget spending on the energy and financial sectors. Now, driven by this pattern of large deficits, debt service spending rose to almost 70% of public revenue in 2021, and that triggered the crisis that we eventually started to experience in 2022. Now, the unsustainable fiscal policies have reflected low public revenue generation and especially poor public expenditure management. Unsustainable fiscal policies have also resulted from weak management of the SOE sector that has engendered massive liabilities for the central government. Now, in addition to the unsustainable fiscal policies, we have seen, especially since the crisis, rapid monetary expansion. The macroeconomic difficulties have reflected in rapid depreciation of the exchange rate, persistently high inflation, high interest rates, rising non-performing loans in the banking system, which have driven weak credit expansion, ultimately resulting in subdued real economic growth. And to sort of give you a sense of the extremely difficult macroeconomic situation we continue to face, inflation, which today is around 23.2%, has actually been above 20% for the last 34 months. Now consider this. In the 18 years prior to the crisis in 2022, inflation had been above 20% for only 6 months. So the recent experience of above 20% inflation for 34 consecutive months is one that we had not been used to in the 2 decades prior to the recent crisis. Again, the exchange rate, which depreciated by 19.2% in 2024, has actually experienced instability at a rate that we had not known in the 25 years prior to the crisis. So from the period 2001 to 2021, the average depreciation of the exchange rate had been under 10%, and the exchange rate had depreciated by more than 19% in just 2 years, in the 21 years prior to the crisis. So present rates of exchange rate depreciation are quite high in historical terms. So this really is the macroeconomic background that has animated the conversation we have been having through this dialogue on the problem. Now, at the start of our deliberations and through the deliberations, it became quite clear that a fundamental driver of our recurring macroeconomic challenges is really the failure to address critical, long-standing, and long-identified problems in key areas. In other words, virtually little of what we heard through the deliberations was new. The concerns and viewpoints really expressed a dissatisfaction with the way in which we have managed issues that we have all been collectively aware of as the impediments to achieving and sustaining macroeconomic stability. Now, some of these issues include public sector bureaucracy and inefficiency, and generally poor public sector administration in Ghana. A second issue is corruption. A third is poor regulation, especially as it impacts the private sector. A fourth issue is poor implementation of policies and laws. And Mr. Finance Minister, one of the ways in which you can make a difference as Finance Minister is in your steadfast implementation of public financial management laws and rules in Ghana. If you can top other leaders of the Treasury in your enforcement of the PFM Act, the PFM rules, and the financial rules of the public sector, you will make a difference as Finance Minister. Because, Mr. Minister, it became clear in the deliberations that whereas the PFM law requires the government of Ghana to report regularly on the expenditure arrears of government, on the contingent liabilities of government, on the cost and efficiency of tax expenditures. These reporting requirements have in the main not been complied with. So it's clear where you can make a difference. Another fundamental issue is generally low productivity, including low productivity in the public sector. Now, in addition to highlighting these fundamental issues that underpin the recurring macroeconomic challenges, we also tackled some of the more specific drivers of macroeconomic stability. And we did this discussion under 4 main headings. We considered ways to ensure fiscal discipline, stability, and sustainability, ways to ensure effective monetary policy and exchange rate stability, ways to ensure financial sector stability, and then addressing additional issues that could impinge on short and long-term macroeconomic stability. Now, on the fiscal policy issues, we call for the government to embark on major tax reforms, a key focus of which should be to simplify the tax regime. Now, Mr. Minister, we want you to make it a point to ensure that your tax policies are made in a medium-term framework that ensures predictability of the tax regime. This is quite important, that the tax regime is made to be predictable, and that would require that tax and revenue policy is conducted in a medium-term framework to allow the private sector to manage their operations in a macroeconomic environment that reflects certainty and predictability. On tax reform, we also urge that the VAT system be reformed. And this reform should aim to address the existing wide VAT gap. The present VAT gap is more than 50%. In other words, the actual VAT collection reflects less than half of what we should be collecting. So the reform of the VAT regime should aim at reducing the VAT gap. Now, as you conduct this reform, we advise also that you consider revising downwards the VAT rate to enable improved compliance and stronger collection. On fiscal policy and revenue generation, we would like the minister to review the fiscal regime in the extractive sector, to increase the revenue to the public sector from that industry. We believe that the extractive sector can be a central element of our effort to rapidly improve public sector revenue generation. And we believe this should be an important focus of revenue policy going forward. Still on revenue, we would like to see a reform of property tax administration. And this reform should consider ways to leverage technology to improve compliance and collection. Property tax administration has been a key weakness of the revenue system. And Mr. Minister, again, one of the ways in which you can make a difference would be to emerge as a minister under whose watch our local government authorities dramatically improve local revenue generation, including through property taxes. To give you an example, the Accra Metropolitan Assembly is perhaps one of the richer local government authorities in Ghana. Yet research shows that the AMA has a property tax under collection rate of more than 60%. Mr. Minister, that has to change by the end of your tenure as Finance Minister. That has to change. In fact, I advise you to find out the under collection rate as of now at the start of your term and to set for yourself a target to rapidly and dramatically improve that situation you have inherited. Would also like the administration to embark upon the most comprehensive tax education and sensitization program we have seen in this country since independence, with the objective of improving tax compliance. We want to see a campaign that never before has been seen in Ghana about the citizens' obligation to pay their taxes. I turn now to expenditure management, where we call for strict enforcement of the rules governing budget preparation, approval, implementation, and parliamentary oversight. We call also for the establishment of a credible medium-term expenditure framework that ensures adequate provision of funding for projects before commencement. Mr. Minister, when you present your budget and the medium-term estimates, we want you to ensure that the medium-term expenditure framework really reflects the medium-term fiscal intentions of the government. They should not be estimates that are put there simply to tick the box. We want to see a reform of public sector procurement. That should include, among others, developing benchmark prices to guide public agencies in their procurement activities to ensure transparency and value for money. Under procurement reform, we call for regular forensic audits of public procurement to address issues of waste and corruption. I turn now to reducing fiscal risk through reform of SOEs. We call for the enforcement of transparent financial reporting and good corporate governance practices at SOEs. And we urge also that the government establish a performance-based compensation system for the SOE sector, one that links pay and compensation within SOEs to deliverables aligned with the government's priorities. With regard to PFM and other fiscal reforms that can support fiscal stability and macroeconomic stability, we call for a review of the Fiscal Responsibility Act to strengthen the fiscal rules, their enforcement, and parliamentary oversight, especially regarding suspension of the rules in the event of an emergency. Among others, we would like to see the fiscal rule contain a debt ceiling. We also call for and endorse the government's manifesto commitment to establish an independent, legally backed fiscal council, which would serve as a citizens' board for surveillance of government. To improve monetary policy operations and their effectiveness, we recommend enhancing coordination between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Ghana to ensure fiscal and monetary policy alignment. And Mr. Minister, we particularly call for ensuring daily coordination of monetary and fiscal policy. The recent decline in T-bill rates, although a development that has brought you much joy and happiness, has caused ripples in monetary policy circles. So we advise that you strengthen and enhance coordination with the monetary authorities. To improve the operation of foreign exchange markets to contribute to exchange rate stability, we urge the central bank to work with key stakeholders to integrate fintech liquidity and transactions into overall banking system liquidity. Further, to improve foreign exchange markets, we call for strengthening the regulation of foreign exchange bureaus and the elimination of illegal foreign exchange markets. We also request the government to review the foreign exchange retention regime in various sectors, including the mineral sector, to support exchange rate stability. On strengthening the banking system and financial intermediation, we call for the recapitalization of the Bank of Ghana to empower and strengthen the central bank to conduct its monetary policy and financial stability functions. We also call on the central bank to conduct a feasibility study and to develop a regulatory framework for non-interest banking. To strengthen financial stability, on top of measures already undertaken by the central bank, we call on the fiscal authorities to prioritize improving Ghana's sovereign credit rating, because the present rating situation of the country has been a major challenge to the operations of the banking system. So we invite the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Ghana to actually establish a desk between them that will be responsible for engaging with the ratings agencies to update them about fiscal and monetary reforms, to update them about economic developments, to ensure that we influence the sentiments that inform their ratings. Finally, to address one. All right. Thank you. Finally, just the final point on cross-cutting issues. We call for an improvement in the regulatory environment to ensure that regulations that affect the private sector are carefully designed to encourage private sector growth and development rather than hinder private sector growth. We call further for measures to improve productivity across all sectors of the economy, recognizing that without improving productivity, our objective of improving revenue generation would not be realized. Thank you very much.